my pleasure to say I'm now joined by Conservative MP Craig Mackinlay. Craig, thank you very much. It has the feel of a historic speech, that, I think, from Suella Braverman. She was trying to bring in, soften it potentially, quotes from people like Angela Merkel saying that multiculturalism has failed, saying that national identity in the nation-state has endured because it means something to all of us, and that must be protected. What was your overall takeaway from what you heard there from Suella?
I'm really pleased that, what has seemed to have been the unspoken things that nobody's brave enough to talk about, well, brave Braverman is actually now saying it. And I think she is very much striking a chord with most British people who can see that the old United Nations Convention of 1951, a very, very different world, really only anticipating 2 or 3 million people that would be affected or improved by it. And Suella's come up with 780 million people would potentially get through under the terms and the interpretations of that convention that is now, what are we, 72 years old. The world has changed massively. The potential for movement of people has changed massively. And you only have to look at what's happening, an amassing of a lot of generally young men in Libya at the moment, trying to get over to Lampedusa and then into the EU, and no doubt some will try and get here.
She called it, Craig, just on that, she essentially called that an act of modern warfare. She alluded to intelligence which suggests that groups like the Wagner Group, linked to Putin and Russia, are helping with the migrant crisis and with an invasion of Europe by people as an act of modern warfare. I thought that was incredibly strong.
That is a strong statement, but we saw it already in the build-up, or just after the Ukraine war started, with what was happening on the Belarus-Polish border. There was, I think, an anticipation of creating instability in Poland, a very big supporter of Ukraine, to actually allow Belarus to be, if you like, a soft underbelly route into the European Union. Belarus didn't really require any visas or anything else from people travelling to Minsk on international airlines, and they then went over to the Polish border. And at the time, even the UK Army was helping Poland to actually protect that border. And I understand over the last few days, similar is happening again. But what the debate that we have to have is, what is a genuine refugee? Yeah. And I think we will know one if we see one. They are most certainly the women and children that have come out of Ukraine. I struggle to see that these are particularly Albanians. I mean, that was just a ridiculous state of affairs we saw last year. Thankfully, a returns agreement has now come into place and those numbers have reduced. But the sort of the flimsiness of the interpretation, I think, has been now flexed beyond any credible reason. Suella said there's potentially 780 million people. You could anticipate Myanmar, old Burma and old money. That is under a dreadful regime. The potential of 53 million people would have a right under these conventions. Now, no matter how heartfelt we all are, the reality is our nations cannot support this number of people. And I think the interpretations, particularly about economic migrants, seems to be the one that we're not prepared to say. And I'm sorry, I do not believe that all of these young men trying to go from Libya into Lampedusa are genuine refugees. No. They're having a hard time in some tough countries. That's it. And I'm afraid that isn't the interpretation. And you look what's happening in the US as well. They have got massive border incursions. And the last time I looked, most of South America, tough place to be, but I don't think really goes along with the UN Convention. That's it, right. So she's calling for common sense on the world stage now, as in she wants the international community to wake up and say what we need to do as a planet is say, essentially, that some people have a better lot in life than others, and that might be regrettable. But your case for actually being a refugee or an asylum seeker and allowing to enter a country illegally and then stay there should not be determined about whether or not you just want a better life, which I think, frankly, most people, I dare say, probably would agree with, right? Most people probably would agree with. But she makes this point that there are 4 cases for us doing something as an international community, updating the UN Refugee Convention and basically controlling borders. She says that was civic,
And she went to make the point about immigration, for example, is responsible for 45% of new housing demands. She says that schools will have to find 213,000 new places by 2026. 1 in 5 births are to foreign-born mothers in the UK, she said. She said security. She then looked internationally, well, not that far, but she went to Paris, and said that half of crime now, apparently in Paris, according to Emmanuel Macron, is as a result of illegal migration. Fascinating, if true, of course. Practical, we all know what the practical problems there are. And democratic, and that's where she said 72% of Europeans want tighter external border control. Half of Americans would call what's going on at the southern border an invasion. Those are compelling arguments. If the international community does not react to this, and if they are, as she suggests, too afraid of being called racist and illiberal to do anything about it, then where does that leave us, Craig? Do we have to leave the ECHR? What do we do if the world does nothing?
Well, the ECHR certainly has not helped our position. I've not been one of those that have been clamouring to leave the ECHR, even though I would very much support it if it was put on the table. And I'll give you one of the figures that I find quite remarkable. We've got a lot of our problems are domestically created. We've created pull factors for ourselves. Under the same UN convention, the same ECHR, the average yes rate for a refugee application across the EU is a mere 15 to 20%. Ours is 75% based on the same framework and the same menu. I've always found that rather intriguing. So is it little wonder that people say, do you know what, I'm going to pass through all those safe countries in the EU. They could settle in any of them. And let's try give it a go in the UK, because if we can get over there for a mere £4,000 at the hands of a people smuggler, I've got a much better chance of getting a successful application. And what else? Yeah. It's nice to be put in some great accommodation over a long period and the opportunity of working in the underground economy. So I think a lot of this is of our making as well. But the really key point here, Patrick, is it's all very well having these lovely international accords and they're all soft and cosy when they're written and discussed. But when they hit the ground of democracy and it does not accord with what our people want, then I'm afraid there is only one master in our nation. That is the people, and that is what Parliament needs to deliver. It's getting that serious now. It really is getting that serious.
That's really the point she's trying to make, which is to emphasise to the world how serious this is for the world, not just for Britain. She finished by saying we are living in a new world bound by outdated legal models. And that is essentially it. Craig, final question to you. Was that just an audition to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, do you think? And if so, was it a good one?
I don't think so. No, well, it's great red meat for, I think, most of the population. It shouldn't be throwing red meat to the population. These should be standard things that a sensible government should do and provide. It's the sort of thing that I espouse because I know that this is what my population, my electorate in South Thanet want to hear and they want to see delivered. So, no, I think we should forget the sort of electioneer and all the rest of it. This is, frankly, the right thing to do, and I take my hat off to her.
It's interesting, actually. I've just seen a tweet out from Emmanuel. Thank you, Craig, by the way. I'll leave that there. Craig Mackinlay, great stuff. Thank you very much for coming on. That's Conservative MP for Thanet. I've just seen a tweet which appears to quote Emmanuel Macron saying we cannot embrace all the misery of the world, which is interesting. If indeed that is the initial international reaction to what we've just heard there from Suella Braverman, then I think maybe she's onto something.